So I think I'll start by welcoming everyone to today's webinar. I happen to be in just at the foothills of Mount Kenya, so I'm marveling at the technology. I think if I'm not wrong, George, we are now having our third webinar. And in the previous webinars, ladies and gentlemen, we have had issues touching on production, issues touching on financing, issues touching on logistics, issues touching on trade, as well as having keynote addresses from the AFA Directorate, as well as from the county government. And from our last meeting, I indicated that Kenya Coffee Platform has put up a study on coffee processing. And today's webinar, we would like to dedicate it more on the issues related to that study. As you all know, the cost of processing is one of the key costs when we are talking about coffee production, and therefore it's important to know how we can be able to mitigate the cost in that area. And maybe before we get to the consultants who are conducting this study, I would just ask George to give housekeeping matters. But I would like to assure all those who are attending this webinar, Kenya Coffee Platform will continue having this kind of engagement. May it be in policy, may it be in informing all our producers, as well as those in trade, on the happenings of the coffee industry. I think this is the best way we can be able also to guide our people.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning to you all. Just to a bit of housekeeping. First, this webinar is being recorded, so hopefully even after we finish, you will have the chance of getting all the information that has been shared in this meeting. And two, like you all see, there will be a bit of information that will be presented to you today, and we are sure you will have questions. So we would kindly ask that you direct all the questions to the question and answer box, one for ease of ensuring that we answer all of them, but also just in case we are not able to answer, then we will be able to share the answers with you as a follow-up. We have, of course, the people that support the farmers, either non-governmental organizations or community-based organization being the most. But as usual also, farmers come second, but you can also see their service providers also being there to support the farmers, the national government being with us. The county government hasn't come in yet, but I am sure you can give them the benefit because they come from far. And that's it. So that is who is in the room. Then the agenda for the day is quite detailed and focused. So we just had the welcoming remarks, and after this we'll move straight into the study. But just to set the scene, the idea of these studies, as the chairman has mentioned, is really to ensure that one, we are looking at the areas that of course affect the way we do our coffee. And two, also in ensuring that even as we talk about the price going up and down, that we are very clear about what the costs of this production are. And we are very grateful, to the German Development Corporation, GIZ, for supporting this study. And without much further ado, I will move the screen sharing to our presenters who will introduce themselves and then share the study with us. Thank you.
So thank you, Chairman. Thank you, George, for for the great introduction and also for giving us the opportunity to undertake this study. My name is Andrew Karanja. I represent a consulting firm called Best Results Associates Limited. And with me, I have two colleagues, Wilson Kenywa. Maybe Wilson, say hi.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And then I have another colleague by the name of Boniface Boru, who led us with a prayer this morning. Boru.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. So I would say that thanks again to the Kenya Coffee Platform for giving this opportunity, and also for all the participants for participating in this morning's webinar. We are looking forward to interacting with you and presenting what the findings of the results are. And because of time, I will just go straight to the presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, the study commissioned by the Kenya Coffee Platform was on cost of coffee processing in Kenya. I'll be giving you a brief introduction, and then I'll invite my colleagues to take us through the other parts. So the title of the study was The Cost of Coffee Processing in Kenya. I hope you can be able to see the screen. The objective of the study was to, first of all, as a part of introduction, we know that the Kenya Coffee Platform is in a family of the wider global platforms of coffee, which were initiated around the world. And so this study was also to contribute to that global benchmarking on drivers of economic sustainability of coffee. And participants will not recall that there is a big concern globally on the sustainability of coffee farming, mainly from the pressures coming from the prices, which have been moving up and down. The cost of production has also been going up, and other issues like climate change, which has been putting pressure on producers. So the objective of the study, the broader objective of the study, was to contribute towards this global benchmarking. However, coming straight now to the Kenyan study, the study was to undertake an in-depth study on the cost of both wet and dry processing. That is what happens in the wet mills and what happens in the dry mills, and the costs associated with that. So in doing that, the study tried to establish what is the cost of processing coffee in cooperatives, as we know, and also in the estates, both in the wet mills. And then after establishing that, the study also looked at factors determining that cost. What are the cost factors? And we will be able to, as we go along, to let you know what are those factors. Then at the milling stage, what are the cost of milling and other charges across the millers? We know we have several categories of millers, both the commercial, the grower miller, and also some county-based mills. So those are the key, that was one of the key objective. And then this study was also was geared towards helping filling the data gaps so that we can identify opportunities that can help us reduce the costs, enhance efficiency, and also some of the best practices. What is the industry showing us? How does it compare? I know there are some good ones, there are some inefficient ones, so those practices to be identified. And of course, at the end of it, the study aimed at looking at what does the cost of processing, what is the impact of this cost on farmers' earnings? As an overview, I would like to say that what came out is that the coffee farmers, as their global counterparts, are facing reducing incomes due to falling productivity and rising costs. So there is a squeeze. And comparing with other countries globally, the big producers like Brazil and Vietnam, and also comparable countries like Costa Rica, what is coming out in Kenya is actually shared globally, that farmers are facing reduced income and falling productivity. And the other outcome is that the biggest potential for improving these incomes of farmers, although it is based on productivity, that is the growth in yields, the growth in cherry intakes and others, there is also important income gains which can be gained by improving the efficiency of processing. And this is particularly important for a country like Kenya because we are quality based. And quality, as we know, is the selling point for Kenyan coffee. So if we don't do anything, right, everything right at the processing stage, we tend to lose our quality. So quality processing becomes a very key important factor or process within the Kenyan context. The other emerging evidence from the report indicates that the current low, what is called the low price environment, is not a temporary or short-term phenomenon. It is tending towards that in the medium term, this will be with us for some time. And this, so farmers and stakeholders need to be aware that while the low prices are there and they seems to be improving, the level, they will not be back to the levels where they were sometimes maybe 10 years ago. So this low price environment is not temporary, it's not a short-term phenomena, it is not going to go away very soon. Similarly, globally and in Kenya, it is the review indicated that one of the issues which is affecting the cost is rising costs. And the rising costs are also having a long-term trend. They are increasing day by day. Before then, if you can remember, it's maybe to pick a debe of coffee was only 50 shillings. Today is maybe 100 shillings, and there is pressure for more to be given to labor. So that is going to continue. And the other one, the other long-term issue which is coming into play is the sustainability is being exhibited by the negative impacts of climate change and variability. And this definitely, most of the participants have witnessed this. Even in Kenya, we are having issues to do with weather. Production is being affected. When weather is changing and cold weather is coming in when it is not supposed to be, it is also affecting issues like drying of coffee. So this is going to be part of us going forward. And so we need to take care of that. And what I would like to do now is to invite my colleague, Boniface, to take us through how we did the study, highlighting some of the methodological issues. So Boniface.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Now, to design the draft templates, what we did was first of all to map out all the processes from the time that the cherry is delivered from the farm to the primary wet mill, up to the time when the clean coffee beans are bagged and stored in the designated warehouses. Now, using the literature review, we made a great effort to strike a balance between cooperatives and estates. First of all, based on their contribution to the national coffee output, also the regional production profile, the agroecological zones, and also the ownership configurations. I will discuss this in another, but apart from that, we also corrected. So basically what we did is that we collected quantitative data on the cost of processing using a combination of digital and paper-based questionnaires. And we analyzed this data with the MS Excel because it's simple and it is widespread. And in addition to that, we also interviewed secretary managers in cooperatives, as well as the managers in both small family, as well as large estates, as well as the milling companies. Now, we have some challenges here in the data collection because, of course, we were doing this within the time of COVID-related restrictions. And in addition, of course, there was a lack of records. And in some cases, even in cooperatives, we saw inconsistent or misplaced information, and also we also had limited opportunities of bringing large number of say growers to discuss this because of those restrictions I talked about. However, to bridge that data gap that we identified, we use supplementary data such as audited reports from cooperatives, like from the State Department of Cooperatives and the Coffee Directorate in the Agriculture and Food Authority. Next. Now, as I said, basically the sample of the cooperatives took into account the following factors. First of all, the cherry intake, in which case we basically selected cooperatives and estates with high, medium, and low cherry intakes, as well as the type of wetting, the wet processing technology that they were using. In which case we selected those that were, had pulpers, disc pulpers, and also eco pulpers, because we wanted to bring all these factors into play. Also the agroecological zones, where we selected cooperatives in the high, and estates also in the high, medium, and low agroecological zones, and of course the sources of energy. Within the dry mills, we sampled a mix of commercial, grower, and county mills in different parts of the country. And as my colleagues will attest, we revised the template based on these lessons, so that we were able basically to align with the accounting records and to remove redundant information. Now, in general, these are the wet mills that we sampled: 80 from the cooperatives and 13 from the estates, and distributed like this. Next. And the 9 dry mills that we interviewed, that we sampled, are the ones that we have shown here, and you can see they have got different ownership profiles, because this then would also help us basically to see whether there is a difference between one in one configuration from one to the next. Next. So with this, then I'm going to ask my colleague Wilson to share with us basically what is the outcome of all this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Boniface. I think we can move to the next slides. Ladies and gentlemen, before we delve deep into the cost of processing, let me take you briefly to some of the characteristic features that we found as we collected our data. Out of the 80 wet coffee mills from cooperatives and the 13 estates, you'll find that many or most of them are processing less than 150 kilos a year. For cooperatives, 33% of them are processing less than 150. And for the estates, about 67% of them. So you can see it's a very large proportion of coffee processors who are in the small processing stage. Then the next one that we looked at is those who are between 150,000 kilos to 500,000 kilos. And this is where the bulk of the cooperatives lie. For estates, that was about 11%. And then we looked at those who are about 500,000 kilos a year. And for cooperatives, about 16%. And for estates, 22%. Actually, as a matter of fact, for cooperatives, only 2 societies were processing more than 1 million kilos a year. So that is the scenario in which coffee is being processed. Let's look at another finding as far as the characterization is concerned. Andrew, next slide, please.
Yeah, I'm having problems with the
the technology. Okay, next slide. Yeah. Now, my colleague, the previous one, please.
My computer is getting stuck.
Yeah. Okay, there, please. Oh, I think your finger is moving too fast. Okay, there. Ladies and gentlemen, my previous colleague mentioned about looking at the technology that is being used to process coffee. On my extreme left, and I'm sure it is also on the left on your screens, you'll find the traditional disc pulpers. And what we found out is some of these disc pulpers are very old. Some are older than many of the members in this panel today, because some were established in the 1950s. In fact, I think the oldest we found was 1951. So you can imagine this thing has been processing coffee for nearly 70 years. On the extreme right is the hand pulper, which are being used in the small estates. Now, many of them have been motorized, so they are not using the hand, but the technology basically remains the same. They are using the drums. And then in the middle, we have the latest technology, which are the eco-pulpers, and it's becoming, quite common in Kenya now, although not quite established. So these are the three main technologies that are being used to process coffee in Kenya. And it is on this basis that we are going to look at the cost implications later. Thank you. Now, the other aspect that we looked at, because we were alerted that is an important aspect, or we found it's also an important aspect, is water usage. As you know, without water, there's no processing of coffee. Now, although some wet mills use gravity to obtain water, and mainly from rivers, most of them actually do pumping water. And you can see the picture on the left, on my right, is an extraction of water for use in processing. But water is not important just for physical processing. It's also important for quality, as my colleague mentioned, Kenya is quality-based. So how do they treat water so that it does not contaminate or make the quality of Kenya coffee poor? Now, on the left is a tank that is used for settling water. Most of these wet mills actually do settle water before they use it. Unfortunately, during the flash periods, when the coffee picking is at the highest, it also coincides with the periods when there are also heavy rains in this country. And therefore, there is very little time left for water to settle down. So you'll find that a lot of water being used during those periods has a bit of sedimentation or with the soil and so on. I'm sure most of you have crossed Tana River and other rivers when it's raining, and you can see how red it is, because a lot of soil erosion is also occurring in the coffee producing areas. Now the picture in the middle is unique. This is one wet mill where water is obtained or extracted through gravity, is allowed to settle in a big tank somewhere, and then it is pumped back for processing and for irrigation, because there's an estate with a very big coffee plantation. And they are using solar. What you see on top of there is actually solar panels that are being used. This was unique. We didn't find much, we didn't find it elsewhere where solar was being used for processing. So this is an interesting area that probably could be used to help even with the climate mitigation. And now, another aspect that was important was the environmental considerations. I'm sure you have seen recently some factories being closed by NEMA because of pollution. And we wanted to find out how our coffee processing mills tackling this aspect. Now, on the extreme left, you can see a soak pit where the effluent from processing is allowed to metabolize and then go through the soil and eventually to the rivers, having been cleaned. They also have got pits where the pulp is packed and then around to be collected by farmers for use as a manure. And then on the right, we have one factory, which is becoming quite common, where they recycle the water that they have used for fermentation and for cleaning, for washing, they recycle it back for use in helping the fermentation. So as far as environment is concerned, coffee factories have made good attempt not to pollute our river systems. However, as you know, most of the coffee factories are situated in sloping grounds, and occasionally when there is heavy rains, some runoff will wash some of the pulp into the rivers, but it's not a very common thing. Thank you. Let's move to the next one. Now, what I've dealt with was basically the physical and environmental things that we find. Now, let's look at the costs. And I'll begin first with what we find in cooperatives. Now, what you see there are average prices of coffee processing at society level. The axis on the vertical shows the various societies, and what we have done is to remove their names and replace them with county names so that we can protect their identity, because we made that promise to them. But the interesting bit is to see that the average prices varies from about 6 shillings and 31 cents for the very efficient societies to about 31 shillings and 19 cents for the most inefficient societies. On average, the cost of processing for all societies that we sampled is 14 shillings and 29 cents per kilogram. So the high end, they're about almost 5 times the efficient ones. Now let's look at the cost structure. What comprises this cost? And to help us do that, we divided the societies into 3 tiers. Those that were processing at less than 10 shillings per kilogram, that is what we are calling tier 1. And those who are processing between 10 shillings and 20 shillings, we call it tier 2. And those who are above 20 shillings, we call them tier 3. What can you observe? Quickly, first you can see that those who are in tier 1, on average, they were processing about 515,000 kilograms. Tier 2 were almost about half, less than half of that. And tier 3 were processing about 1/5 of the first category. And this has implications. Again, when you look at the price, those who are in tier 1 who are processing more, the average cost was 7 shillings and 60 cents. Those who are in the middle, 14 shillings and 70 cents. And the laggards were 26 shillings and 90, almost 27 shillings. So the cherry intake has a major contribution towards the cost of processing. But if you go down deeper, you'll find that permanent staff, cashiers, and other staff costs across all the 3 tiers is almost 50%. In fact, in some cases, slightly more than 50% of the total cost. So labor, as my colleague mentioned earlier, is a major contributor, and this is going to be a problem unless something is done because it is increasing in cost. The other key cost is repairs and maintenance, followed by processing materials, of course, because that is based on how much you are processing. But within that structure, there is something that also differentiates between the 3 tiers. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to draw your attention to the line in yellow below there, borrowing costs. You'll find that those who are efficient, their borrowing costs is very low. It's about 1%. Those who are in the middle, 4%. And those high cost ones, they are borrowing money expensively at 8% of their total costs. Something else interesting is about member education. Those who are efficient, they invest much more in educating their members. And probably this contributes to the cherry intake or what they are producing for their wet mills. So there is a correlation. Probably by investing more in your members, you are then likely to get the benefits of a more intake of cherry delivered to your wet mills. Next, please. Now, next slide, this slide. Now, this is a slide that brings very clearly the relationship between the cherry intake and the cost of processing. is giving more or less the same information, but this now is for all the 80 factories. What you can see is that the bars in blue are giving you the cost of processing. Sorry, the intake. And the line in red, which is a trend, gives you the cost. So you can see as the volume of intake declines, your cost also increases. So there is a clear message that if you want to reduce your cost of processing, then you must increase your cherry intake. Next, please. Now let's look at the estates. How do they compare to the cooperatives? For them, the small estates, the average intake was about 14,000 kilos. And for the medium and large estates, the average cherry intake was about 800,500 kilos. For the small estates, the cost of processing is 17 shillings and 84 cents. And you can see for the medium and large estates, it's almost 8 shillings, 7 shillings and 93 cents. An average for the all of them, about 13 shillings. Similarly, labor here, the permanent staff, the casuals, and other staff costs also is coming very close to the cooperatives for the small estates. But for the large estates, the cost of labor is much smaller. It's about 34%. What we found for cooperatives, it was over 50%. So there is some efficiencies that are gained by using labor in medium and large estates. Something else that also attracted our attention is repairs and maintenance. They are slightly lower for the smaller estate, for the estates generally. Now, depreciation for the small estates is very small because maybe they don't recognize the importance of this aspect, or because their records are not well kept, they are not able to keep or to give sufficient information on the depreciation of the equipment. But for the estates, the depreciation is high. That's because also the equipment is much more valuable, they recognize this aspect, and maybe even for tax purposes, this is useful to them. So what we can cut from here is that labor is still a major aspect in processing. And the estates are much more efficient in the use of their labor than the cooperatives. Next, please. So the differences is basically what I've given you, that in the use of labor, the cooperatives are much higher and they tend to use more permanent staff, whereas the estates use casual labor much more. So for cooperatives, they are incurring the costs of keeping permanent staff even at the times that they are not processing their coffee. Cooperatives also have more structured management. Therefore, formalized record keeping and reporting. As you know, they are regulated, so they have to be reporting to the authorities, and therefore the need for them then to have clear record keeping. For the small estates, family labor is critical, but it's not well documented or even accounted for. And then finally, the borrowing costs for cooperatives weigh very heavily on their cost structure. So those are some of the key differences between them. Now, what about the technology? Because we dealt with technology. Obviously, cooperatives don't deal with the hand pulpers, but they do have other, the traditional discs and the copalpa. Now, how does the technology impact on the costs? So what we did is to define these processing institutions into the categories they fall. So, and what we find is that for cooperatives that use traditional disc pulpers, their average cost was 15 shillings and 31 cents. And those that were using eco-pulpers, the modern technology, their cost was much lower, almost 40% lower, at 9 shillings and 14 cents. And for the estates, those which are using hand power bus or the motorized hand power bus, their cost was 12 shillings and 45 cents. And those that were using traditional disc power bus was 15 shillings and 90 cents, very close to the cooperatives. But for those using the eco power bus, their average cost was 10 shillings and 10 shillings. Now you may ask, why these differences? Now what we found is that the eco power bus, of course, use less water. They use less labor because you don't require a lot of labor for washing, because you from the pulping you take straight. But we also found out that it is not enough for you to have adopted the modern technology. In fact, some of the societies that you find with very high costs of average cost coming close to 31 shillings and so on, were actually having eco-power bus. And similarly, even the estates, which are the higher costs, were using eco-power bus. What emerged is that it is not enough for you to adopt a modern technology. You must also accompany it with other restructuring. For example, if you used an eco-power bus, but you still retained very high labor, a lot the permanent staff, then you are not benefiting from that technology. Or if your cherry intake was very low, then you are not using that technology effectively. In other words, you are carrying an expensive equipment that you are not able to make use of. It's just costing you. It's like buying a bus to carry just a few passengers. Next, please. So what is the impact of processing costs on farmer payments? And I'm sure here, most of the farmers now who are listening will be most interested. What you'll find is that those societies that have low costs are also the same societies that are able to pay farmers better. Now, the bars you see here in green are processing costs. So we started from very low societies to high societies. And then the line in yellow shows you the actual payments that farmers receive. And we make a trend, the one in red. It shows then that there is a declining trend. As your costs of processing increases, then you are not able to pay farmers well. So if you want to pay farmers well, then you must decrease your processing costs. This is really the message that this chart is trying to tell you. Next, please. Now, the previous slide about farmer payment has implications on compliance issues. For societies, as you know, there's a regulation that farmers should not be paid less than 80% of the sales. Societies should only retain 20% or less. Now, what we find is that for the low-cost producers and the medium-cost producers, about 68% of them were able to comply with that requirement. In fact, what we found is that one of the societies, which are the highest retention of only 9%, so paying the farmers about 91% of the sales. In the case of high-cost producers, those who are not able to meet 80%, the number was about that 36%. Oh, sorry, it was the reverse. Only 36% of them were able to meet the requirement. And even one of the societies was retaining as much as 50%. So the message is again clear: reduce cost of processing, and then you'll be able to pay the farmers better. But why are those societies unable to meet that requirement? Basically because the 20% retention is not sufficient to meet their operational costs. That's why they're deducting much more than the required. Next, please. Now let's look at the dry mills or the milling. What did we find? On average, a metric ton of parchment costs $57. And the next major item is export bags. Now we convert the number of kilos that go into a ton and see how many bags there are. And the average then was coming to about $43 per metric ton, which was the second most important cost as far as the dry milling is concerned. Then handling charges, all the mills and the handling charges, which on average was about $26.4 per metric ton. And then finally, the transport cost at $16 per metric ton. This is a cost from the milling, from the mill to the designated warehouse. So in total, this comes to about $142.4 per metric ton. If you turn that into cherry, it costs about 2 shillings and 58 cents per kilogram of cherry. Something else we found is that the grower and the county mills overall cost per metric ton of parchment was generally about 14% lower than the commercial mills. And this difference was mainly in the lower charges for export bags and the handling charges. Next, please. Now, during our study, as we talked to various stakeholders, there were some emerging issues that we would like to share with you. First, what we find is that the capacity utilization is very low for all the mills. In Kenya, we are only using about 10% of the capacity. If you have looked at the recent statistics, we are milling about, or rather what the clean coffee that we get is in between 41 and 44,000 metric tons. Now, the installed capacity is for 400,000. So we are carrying a lot of unutilized capacity. And in fact, for what we call grower mills and county mills, that utilization is even much lower. And this has implications on their costs. As we found, most of the growers and the county mills are actually making losses. And therefore, draining the resources of the farmers and eating to their capital. Now, as we talk to them, to the farmers, they also indicated that they are not quite happy with what is declared by the mills. They have suspicion about that they are not getting proper, classification of their coffee. The losses declared are high and not well explained, and so on. Another thing that emerged also from the millers is that because of the increase in the number of small estates, the coffee being delivered for milling is going in very small lots, and therefore forcing them to bulk them so that they can mill in an economical way. That again brings issues when now you have to declare the milling losses and also the quality of the coffee and so on, or classification. Now, a small issue was raised during our discussion about the payment for husks and sweepings. And what we found is that even in the accounts of the cooperatives is that some are declaring this in the annual accounts and some are not. Therefore, this is an issue that maybe the authorities and may want to follow up even in South Yakawa. Next, please. So the overall picture, how does it look like? Because the main objective of this study is to establish the cost of processing. Now, as you remember, from the charts, we found that coffee processing in the estates was on average about 13 shillings and 44 cents, wet mills. And then the dry mills, the cost is about 2 shillings and 58 cents per kilogram of cherry. So this gives us a total cost of dry milling of 16 shillings and 2 cents for estates. For cooperatives, we modify this a little bit because coffee that is processed or cherry that is processed comes from farms quite far and brought to the processing place, and that cost is part of the processing. So when we asked the questions, we were told that farmers are generally paying about 100 shillings per bag to bring to the factory. that translated on average to about 1 shilling per kilo. Now, add that to what we found was the average cost of processing of 14 shillings and 29 cents and the 2.58 for milling, it gives us an average cost of 17 shillings and 87 cents. So the estate's average cost is slightly lower by almost 2 shillings compared to the cooperatives. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the picture that emerges as far as the cost of processing is concerned.
So thank you, Wilson. I think I'll take over from here and make a few concluding remarks and a few recommendations which are coming from the study. And one of the conclusions we came about was that most of the wet mills, and I think most participants will agree with me, is that they are in a situation, they are dilapidated and they are using old equipment. And there is limited adoption of new processing technology. Although you are talking about eco-pulpers, we found that their usage in the coffee sector is still very low. There were reasons which were given, like issues to do with the cost, installation cost, but there are also misgivings which were coming, maybe related to quality, but those ones I think they need to be investigated. Then what came out as a conclusion is that coffee processing is labor intensive, with labor accounting for almost 50%. I think that has been highlighted quite well. Cherry intake is the most important factor in determining the cost of processing in wet mills. And while technology is reducing this cost, it has to be accompanied by, increases in production and cherry intake and the other operational efficiencies. So cherry intake is important. As long as cherry intake remains low, the cost will remain high, but technology can help to reduce that. And when you get the overall picture, the one which you have just seen is that in terms of processing cost when you process in the wet mill and the dry mill, the cost, when you share the two costs, 80% of the cost is coming from what happens in the wet mill. So what it tells us is that if you want to improve the cost of processing, then the area to look most is actually at the wet mill, because that is where the opportunity, that is where the biggest slice of the cost is going. So 80% is in the wet mills. The other aspect which came out is that in terms of the dry processing is that commercial millers dominate the market. And the largest the 5 millers are accounting for 77%. This means that all the rest, if you get out of the 22, you minus 5, all the rest are scrambling for the 33. And that is quite something, because the amount of coffee which is there is very low. So they are hardly making their ends meet. And what is happening is that although most growers had invested in grower mills, and also some counties have started to invest in counter mills, they are finding that if you target only your cooperatives or you are within the counties where you are, you not have enough adequate volumes. So most of them are shifting towards commercial status. So maybe in the next few years, you'll not have this county grower or county mills, because they'll be licensed as commercial mills to expand their territories. The low capacity utilization is a phenomenon which is in both wet and dry mills. We found that most of the wet mills, they have an installed capacity of about 900,000 kilograms of cherry, but they are hardly handling about a third of that, 33%. So there is a lot of unutilized capacity there. And it is even worse in the dry mills because they are using only 10%. So the industry is carrying a lot of unutilized capacity just because the production has come down. And this is costly because it has to be paid for. The other conclusion is that the growers expressed a lot of mistrust and suspicion on milling losses, grading and classification. declared by not all the millers, but some of them. And this is across the board, and it is an issue which needs to be handled by the industry, how to handle it going forward. So those were the main conclusions from the study, and there are more in the report, so you'll be able to see them. Then some of the recommendation is that this is shared, and it is the message which has come throughout is that enhancing production definitely not only lower the cost of production, but also lower the cost of processing. Cherry intake only comes from production, so these we have to enhance all the mechanism to enhance production to lower the cost of processing. The cooperatives need to restructure their operations to reduce their fixed cost, especially the labor cost. They are having labor costs which fixed labor costs which are neutralized most of the year, and they need to figure out how they are going to spread that cost, because it is eating into the cost of processing. Rehabilitation and modernization of malt mills, including digitization, is an important element which going forward. So it is recommended as one of the areas where the country needs to invest into. Standardization of financial reporting by cooperatives. We found that although we are using the accounts from the State Department of Cooperatives, both at the county and the national level, these are not standardized. You find one reporting one element, the other one not reporting another element. So going forward, maybe we need to standardize them so that we can use them as some source of data. To deal with the issue of the suspicion about milling losses and quality assessment, one of the recommendations is that we should have independent laboratories for independent assessment of milling losses and quality assessment, so that farmers can be able to submit samples where they can be able to cross-check with what they are getting from the millers. This is the only way they can be able to be assured that what they are getting reported back is what is they got from those independent assessment, and this will remove their suspicion in the industry, because it's not very good. Then the other recommendation is that we should have a clear policy or guidelines on licensing of more mills in the country, especially the dry mills. And this is particularly the case for where public investments are involved, like where cooperatives and counties are involved in investing in mills. Because as we can see, if you are utilizing only 10% of the capacity, then you need to look at what do you need to guide the investment, future investment in terms of these mills. We know there are challenges in terms of regional balances. Some areas are not well served by these mills, but that can be included in the guidelines and the feasibility studies be undertaken. Then we need also to promote research and adoption of appropriate climate change mitigation and adaptation technologies. As we said, this is a phenomenon which is coming, and it is going to affect both production and processing and other aspects. Then apart from the costs of installing the new technology like eco-purpose, one of the concerns and issues which was coming through was also the issue about how does this new technology impact on quality. So the assessment of the impact of the new technologies on quality needs to be undertaken in more in-depth undertaking. This not only for the eco-purpose, but also for the milling technology. We know they are coming with all manner of technologies which are coming on board, and we need to know whether there is any issue to do with the quality in terms of grading, in terms of classification, and all the rest. The issue about the study stated that family labor, especially for small farms, is not well documented, and one needs to understand this in a more detailed manner. Family labor, small farms, and cost centers, which are coming also in the cooperatives, we need to understand which labor goes to where, so that we can be able to see those cost centers. And finally, when we are undertaking this study, it came out that the Kenya Coffee Platform, or Sauti ya Kahawa, when we went out there to the stakeholders, some of them were questioning what is the Kenya Coffee Platform. And we had to take a lot of time to explain to them what it is. So the message to Sauti ya Kahawa is that it needs to roll out, especially the county forums, quickly, so that the stakeholders come together and they come to know the good work the Kenya Coffee Platform is doing. So ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to thank you very much for listening to us very keenly. I know it has taken a bit of time, but that was the main messages which we had to give to you on the cost of coffee processing. So over back to you, the convener. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karanja and team, for the presentation and, of course, for all the insights that you've shared with us. The next few minutes, we are going to do the question and answer, and we had set at least a bit of time so that then the stakeholders would ideally have as much as possible time to interrogate, of course, the study and also support in ensuring that the final document that comes out then, of course, represents both your sentiments and also the sentiments of some of the people in this meeting room who some might have been, of course, respondents, others, of course, might have some additional information. So we had asked that all questions go through the question and answer so that then it also gives the panelists some time, of course, to prepare for your question. And so for Dr. Karanja and team, you can see the questions on the question and answer. I will pick on a few to ask their questions verbally for as long as time allows. And then for any that might be left out without being answered, then we should be able then to record those and send back the answers when sending the recording and the presentation. So the presentation and the recording that you've just seen will be sent to you. And as soon as, of course, with your input, the study is out, then it will also be shared with those of you that are in this group today. So to give, of course, a lot of credit to those of us who've joined from the county, I want to call on Irongo Maina, who had, of course, the first question, to ask it verbally. Irongo Maina from Murang'a County Government, kindly take the floor.
Thank you, George. It's very simple, actually. It was based on price, on cost. We looked at, we divided the tiers into three. As I said, tier one were those who are below or who are processing coffee at less than 10 shillings. And the next group, or tier two, were those processing between 10 shillings and 20 shillings. And the third category were those processing at over 20 shillings. Now, the cherry intake was a result of that. What we found for those who are processing less than 10 shillings, their average cherry intake was 515,000 kilos. And for those processing between 10 and 20, their cherry intake was about 244,000 kilos. And for those processing at over 20 shillings was 112. So it is the cost of processing that drove the tiering, not the cherry intake. The cherry intake was actually a result after grouping them that way. I don't know whether I've answered the question.
Can I just add something on top of that? That even within one cooperative, if it had several wet mills, you would find that some of the wet mills might fall in tier one or tier two, and others might fall in tier three. So really, this I think this is a very useful categorization, because you can actually see where even within a single cooperative, those that need urgent attention and those that might actually be on the road on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, Irongo, your question, I would say, has been answered. So we'll go to the next question. And like I said, we'll pick a few for this session. So don't feel pressured if we are not yet at you. But we also like ensuring that we balance the people talking. So we are going to have Alice Ngugi, who is going to ask her question. So Alice, we see you have a couple of questions, so you can unmute yourself and maybe choose the ones that you'd want, and then we'll show they've been answered live. Alice, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, George. How are you this morning? Yes, I just wanted to find out, I didn't see anywhere they visited like a wet mill that is using greenhouse technology. And in my work, when I was in TechnoServe, we introduced a lot of, there's a lot of now technology, greenhouse technology, to shorten the period for drying, and automatically that also shortens, relieves the wet mills of a lot of this labor that is really costing them a lot of money. And above all, you had said at the beginning that during wet mill processing, the peak coincides with the heavy downpours. And we're very keen to find out how that cost is really being reflected in the whole scenario. That would be interesting, because I think as we do technology in machinery, the processing bit, we need to also introduce a drying technology that is cheap for the farmer to reduce the entire cost as we do other interventions in increasing productivity of the farms. Thank you. I don't know whether I'm clear on that.
Yes, thank you, Alice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Alice, for asking that question.
Yes.
Because we did not address it in fully in a presentation, but in our report it's actually there. We did visit one society, amazingly, that was using greenhouse technology to dry their coffee, because they are in the upper zone, the T zone, and they are in an area where it takes much longer to dry coffee using the traditional sun drying method. So they have installed greenhouses in all their wet mills, and they told us that this has reduced their average drying period from 14 days to 10 days. So your intervention in that area seemed to have helped. Now, the implications of that on cost is, of course, through labor saving. Where you are using sun drying, you have to use a lot of labor for turning the beans, so that they dry in a uniform manner. So yes, there is. And what I don't know right now is, because we didn't go everywhere, is how many other societies could be doing that. But at least in the sample that we have, we did witness that. Thank you, Alice, for asking that question.
Thank you very much. And I think now we will go to Damberi. Damberi, I can see you've even put your hand up. So, and we also see you have a couple of questions. So kindly arrange them in a way that then it's easy for our panelists to answer. Damberi, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I had a couple of questions, and one of them was concerning the low prices that Dr. Karanja said they will be there for long term, and I really wanted to understand in terms of in our Kenya situations, how low is that compared to the global scenario. The other one is on I was very much interested with the issue of the costs distribution in the cooperatives, and I know it didn't appear, but I was much interested to know how the distribution of the cost would have been if We also looked at the men who are producing the coffee and the women who are producing the coffee, and see how we can be able to probably see how each one of them is contributing. And I don't know, but I was interested in that. That'd be interesting to know. The other one is on, did you find the 3 to 4% costs of electricity, fuel, and water significant enough, especially to bring the interventions that Alice talked about? Maybe I can rest it at that point.
Thank you, Peter. I think the first of all is the raw prices. I think that this as you can see from 2018, 2019, the raw prices were very low. Currently, they are edging up, and Kenya, of course, enjoys a premium over the and above the global average due to quality. But what we are saying, when you look at the trends over the last, maybe over a longer period, over 10 years, and currently what is going on, you realize that the prices are at the platform, they are at the bottom, and they may be picking up. So that is what we are saying. It might take a long time before they go up to where they used to be, where you used to hit 300, 350, 400. So that you're going to take a long time because of the supply demand situation, which is in the globally. And also, of course, definitely this pandemic has not helped matters. So it will prolong the returning us to normal, but it will take a long time before we go up to where we used to be maybe in the beginning of the 2008 or 10 years ago. So that is what we are saying, the growth phenomena. It is not to be taken that it is 2 years. On men and women, we looked at gender, yes, and it is contained in the report in terms of how it plays out in the coffee processing. And however, what we did not look into, and I agree with you, is that we did not look at what does it take for men and women processing cost, in terms of processing cost, because when the coffee is delivered to the wet mills, it is not separated where it is coming from. It is all from all the members. So it is brought together, it is processed together. So it is difficult to isolate and say this is coming from women farmers and this is coming from men farmers. So although you could have seen the different membership of cooperatives, some have more women, some have less men, but majority of them have actually, most of them are dominated by men membership. So that is an issue which maybe, those are some of the micro studies we are proposing should be taken so that we now bring into focus more of these issues. In terms of the 4% energy, Wilson, will you like to comment?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Also to add to that question of gender, we looked at the mills that are managed by women vis-a-vis those which are managed by men. And there was no significant difference between the average cost in those mills that are managed by men or women. It looks like what matters more is not so much the manager, but the entire committee in relation to the cost. So you cannot say that the mills that are managed by men are more efficient than those managed by women. No, it's not true. But what we also found out is that in certain aspects of the processing, women are more than men. Like when it comes now to sorting, or rather, when the coffee is in the drying beds, women were more in, sorting the bad beans from the good beans and so on. As far as power is concerned, we had a problem because the accounts, the way they are normally organized in the cooperatives is they put electricity, fuel, and water together. So you need a micro study to go and find out how much of that lumped cost is electricity and how much is normal diesel and water. But interestingly, because you have raised the issue, what we found is many cooperatives are actually not even paying for water. But some are paying for water. What we can't tell at this stage whether it is a failure of the authorities, because water as a natural resource is not supposed to be paid for, or whether they obtained waivers, whatever the case is. I know this issue was raised, I think, by the chairman at one point. We investigated it, and we found that the majority of them are not paying for water.
Okay, the other aspect is about power. I think this we have to give credit where it's due, is that most of our cooperatives now are on the grid line, thanks to the government electrification program. So most of them are using electricity for powering their processing plants. But however, most of them we found that most of them have retained both because of the instability in the electricity, the blackouts and whatever. So they are using both electricity and diesel. Diesel is being used as a backup. So the two systems are in operation, but the main one is electricity. Most of them are hooked to the grid now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, I will ask Josephine to ask her question. So Josephine, I will unmute you now. So Josephine, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Okay. Thank you, George, and good morning, everyone. My question was, I noted on the part for the estates, on the costs, debt was missing. Is it that the estates did not take up debt, or is it that they were not willing to disclose? Then my second question was, do we have figures for costs just specifically to processing and not involving the other admin costs like the board allowances and the insurance? Do we have costs that very specifically cover maybe electricity, the workers only, without involving the other admin costs, so that from a farmer's perspective, I can be guided, this is what it actually takes to process the cherry? That's it.
Thank you very much, Josephine. And for those of you that don't know Josephine, she's the current chair of the Nairobi Coffee Exchange, representing the producers and also the treasurer of Kenya Coffee Producers Association. Thank you.
So I think the first one on Josephine, thanks Josephine for your question. I think the one on estates. Yes, especially the small estates, some of them were willing to disclose and the debt they take, but mostly they take these mainly what we call advances, and they were a very small proportion of their costs. For the larger estates, here I would say the major issue was disclosure. As you know, most of them, the larger estates, mainly they are companies, and the managers you meet there, they are not the owners of the company, and when we interrogate them, they might not have that information, or they might not be willing to disclose. So there was also a disclosure issue. Unlike in the cooperatives where you could get even the accounts and you could see what they are paying in terms of debt servicing, advances, and all that. So I would say that there is a understatement in that area on debt, especially for the medium and large estates, because most of them are companies and they don't want to disclose that to maybe third parties. Wilson, I would like to maybe the cost of processing without administrative, maybe you can answer to that.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. When we look at the cost of processing, as my colleague had initially indicated, we mapped out the various cost centers, all the way from when the coffee is delivered to the wet mill up to the point where it's delivered to the designated warehouse. Unfortunately, records are not maintained by the cost center. For example, you cannot tell how much labor was used for washing coffee, or how much labor was used in sorting at the dry bed. Labor is labor as far as those factories are concerned. And this is where we are saying now we need another micro study where somebody goes and sees how much labor time, how many man hours or women hours are used actually in washing, how much women hours or man hours are used in sorting during drying. That's the only way you can now be able to tell how much is actual cost, which is processing minus, say, the committee allowances, minus the members' education, transport, and so on. But with the records that you have, you cannot do it, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wilson. I think for the next question, Mary Mongai, if it's possible, let me unmute you and maybe you can ask your questions now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samuel Thuo. I was asking if there is any inferred correlation between the cost of processing and the quality of coffee realized, so that maybe you can say the cooperatives that are, or wet mills that are using less cost maybe are getting lower quality coffee or otherwise. And the other one that somebody has already answered was on the legal repercussions to the COPs that don't adhere to the statutory requirement of only retaining 20% of the coffee proceeds. Thank you.
On the correlation, what's coming out clear, although we didn't go very deep into it, is that, and you'll find it in the figure we are presenting, especially on payments, is that those high, you can call them tier one, those who are producing and at a very low cost, actually they happen to have been paying the highest. And if you look at their, and this tells you a lot, because it's not only about the processing cost, it's also about the quality of the coffee they deliver. And as we are saying, they even spend money on the members' education, and that has a bearing on what is coming to the factories, to the wet mills. So there is a correlation, although we didn't establish a direct link, we did not probe further on that, but you could see even from the payments, from what they were getting from the milling records and all that, that they are delivering, actually they are doing good job in terms of even the quality of the coffee. On the legal implications, repercussions, this is an area which we are highlighting so that the concerned State Department and the Kenya Coffee Platform can take some of these matters up, because definitely when a cooperative or its chair is deducting 50% of the proceeds and retaining 50%, this is a major issue which should concern the regulatory authorities, because the guidelines is that you should only retain 20%. So the compliance issues, and this is what the farmers have been complaining, you are retaining much of my money to do whatever you want to do. So this is an issue we are raising, and this study is coming out clearly on what is happening, so that the regulatory authorities can also follow it up, because retaining 50% of the proceeds is 2 times or 2.5 times what is you are supposed to retain.
In addition to what Andrew has said, I think I would like to add that there could also be a question of capacity of the State Department of Cooperatives, basically to follow through to enforce compliance. Because looking at the database of the number of cooperatives that are registered in Kenya, and they have been doing this since 1925, by 2014, there were over 10,000 registered cooperatives. Now, if you look at the staff establishment, which is charged with that responsibility of following and drilling down to what we have done in this study, I don't think they have the capacity to do that. Not when you have got 10,000 cooperatives, each one of them is required to make a report, and basically they also have to follow up before they are able to generate that. So I think this might just be an indication of just how important the sector is, and yet I don't know. I think there might be need to be invest more in terms of support in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have the State Department of Cooperatives in the house. So if they want a right of reply, we can always put them through. So the next question, I don't know whether Mary, you managed to get your mic okay. If you can speak now. If not, then we will rush down to someone else this time. As we wait for Mary, maybe I'll ask Alice. I'll allow Alice to talk. Alice Karori this time. And you mentioned something on institutions. The floor is yours, Alice.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the presenters for the wonderful presentation. So mine, the question I asked on the forum had already been answered, but I was wondering whether they looked at the certifications. A few years ago, I did a study and disaggregated the certified cooperatives and the non-certified. In the certified cooperative, the farmers were getting a higher pay, only go down to see about the costs. So I could have been interested to see if they had divided them to certified and uncertified. Then the other question was to do with, I know the study was doing the process until the point of export, but I was wondering whether they had also looked at the cooperatives which have their own rosters, like cooperative probably, to see whether there is, anything about the costs. The other one was more, I'm happy the cooperatives are in the house. It's one of the key points of this study was the fact that the cherry into the costs. It's such a big factor. And yet on the news, all the time what we are seeing is farmers complaining about their cooperatives. And the next step is that factories want to disengage and be independent, in a time when they should be trying to match together. So I was wondering what is being done, because even when the management of cooperatives is found to have done, management of funds, there is no follow-up. So what can be done to regulate this and to bring them to account?
Thank you very much, Alice. Dr. Karanja, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Aris. Boniface, would you like to go first on the...
Yes, let me mention something about the certification. Yes, indeed, we came across not just cooperatives that were certified, but also some large estates that were certified. And indeed, the cost of certification, depending on which certifying authority, was quite substantial. But there were a lot of other benefits that came with certification, which and they did not. So they did not actually mind paying the certification fee, because, for instance, one of the benefits of being certified that they disclosed to us was that they were able to market their product. Their product would be even labeled in the export market with their point of origin very clearly disclosed. So that gave them exclusive and high-end market. The other point that they had also managed to do was that they had attracted eco-tourists. If it were not for Corona, I think they are making money by, they charge about $10 per visitor. And we are talking about foreign visitors who come to their estates, and they are taken through they call it from the farm to the cup. So they take them through that whole process. So, but of course, there is a lot of investment that has to be made before they are certified. So that is something that I think that more cooperatives should go towards, because it will open up markets that otherwise would not be feasible. Maybe my colleagues may also want to add something on top of that.
Yeah, I think the other issue, Alice, you raised is about adding value and processing. I think we also visited some societies which were doing value addition and things, definitely roasting. But our study ended up, we were looking at the two ends, the issue about processing at primary level and secondary level. We the terms of reference did not go to the issues about processing for roasting and all that. But we appreciate the fact that they are estates, they are cooperatives which are vertically integrated in that they are doing all the work of processing, then they mill, then they go all the way to where they're adding value and actually roasting and doing that. And you could see the benefits which are coming. That came from the income side. You could see the income side is better than some of them compared to the rest of them. So that we looked into, but we were not comprehensive. The terms of reference did not extend to the issues about roasting. The other issue which you raised, which is very important, and actually it is a message which is cutting across and it is hidden here, is that this is about cherry intake. And I'm happy the State Department of Cooperatives is here, because we found societies which are doing even 80,000 cherry intake. And their cost, they are the ones which are doing 31. And they are, as we mentioned in the presentation, there were 1 or 2 which were doing 1 million kilograms. And you could see definitely what it means. So going forward, it's a matter of policy for maybe the State Department and stakeholders to agree. What we do is these small wet mills, which are high cost, inefficient. They are deducting almost 50% of the farmers' proceeds. And they are not actually, they are there just because some of the farmers want to have a factory, but in terms of efficiency, they are pulling everybody down. We found even in some big cooperatives, they have even decided to close. We encountered cases of 2 cooperatives, big cooperatives, which have decided, some of the factories, I think 3, they were closed, and the farmers were advised to take coffee to the next factory. So they are doing all that because they are trying, there's kind of amalgamating without going through the legal process. So that is an issue which maybe the State Department of Cooperatives and the stakeholders can take up, so that going forward, you can see how to organize the industry to reduce some of these high inefficient processing facilities.
Thank you very much for that answer. So we'll give Mary one more. If not, I'll read her question. So Mary Mungai, one last time. Okay. Then as she tries, I will read live the questions that Mary asked. So there were a couple of questions. The first one was, what was the comparison of milling losses between commercial and grower mills? That's the first one. Then the second one is, what advice do you give in regards to establishment of more mills, especially to cooperative leadership and AFA? And I think the other question was, and for those of you that don't know, Madam Mary is the immediate former Commissioner of Cooperatives. So even as she asks these questions, I think she has a lot of experience in dealing with them. Dr. Karanja.
Thank you. Although we can't hear Mary, we appreciate her questions, and given her experience and her former job, we know she is aware. She is quite acutely aware of these issues. The milling losses, we looked at the milling losses from the outturn reports, from the milling outturn reports we got from all the cooperatives we visited. And what we found out is, yes, there were slight differences, but no significant differences between milling losses from grower and commercial millers. And because you find in one outturn a slight difference, but in the next one on average, but on average, there was not much difference. And what we could find out was that if you aggregated everything, you find there is a certain average milling loss you'd expect for parchment 1, parchment 2, parchment 3. For instance, parchment 1, we found that it is around 19–20%. The other one is about, parchment 2 is about 22%. So, but we need the technologies being used by these millers are almost similar, although some of the grower millers are having, some issues in terms of, but not on milling, but on grading. But we need to really focus on as we said, we need to focus on how to really nail down the issue about milling losses. The sentiment expressed by growers might be true or might not be true, but they need to be proven in a objective manner so that this suspicion within the industry is done away with, or there is a mechanism for which growers can feel that they are catered for. And that is why we are recommending these independent labs, which can be able to do some of this. And Dedan Kimathi, I know, is doing some of this work. The issue about the establishment of mills, the report is very clear about this. We are saying, let us develop a policy, some guidelines, framework on how to establish the mills. We cannot go on, especially for the private sector. I think that is left to a private sector investor to do the feasibility study, do whatever they are supposed to do to know whether they want to invest or not to invest in a mill. But for where public investment, like cooperative societies, like counties want to invest in mills, and we know what is happening, then we need guidelines. And I think that is what we are proposing, that there needs to be a policy or guidelines which needs to come to be established. And apart from the regional balances, which maybe some counties are very far away from a mill, those are the issues which needs to be in the guidelines. Otherwise, if you look at the totality, it will be very difficult to justify the investment of a mill in Kenya today. And I will leave it at that.
Those are quite strong words, especially for those of us who have proposals on the table on starting up a mill. But maybe the next question, I'll give the floor to Victor. Victor Mirori, you have a few questions. So the floor is yours. You can ask them. You can unmute yourself. Victor? If Victor is having challenges, asking their questions, I'll look at some of the others that have been asked. I think, Mark, I don't know whether you want to ask your question, but I think it has been partly answered. And Mark was, let me give Mark the floor if Victor is not able to. I don't know whether, Mark, you're able to. I know one of the recommendations was that we look more at ensuring the Kenya Coffee Platform. Victor, we hear you?
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, well, mine wasn't a question, but one, I appreciate the presentation that was there, quite rich in content. I was only requesting for the sharing of the same after the webinar.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Victor. And for all of you, the presentation will be shared, but we'll also put you on the mailing list of the final report. And if you have any further recommendations or actions after you get the presentation and you go through this recording, please feel free to reach out to the panelists, and they will either add that as part of their report or they will include it in their final recommendations. We had a question from Wamboi, and I don't know whether, Wamboi, you want to ask it live. I don't know whether you're still in the room. As I can see, we are heading towards the end of the hour and some people are dropping off. Maybe, Wamboi, you can ask the question. It was on recommendation on how to restructure labor. Okay, since we're having problems with people unmuting. So Wamboi's question was, give at least some recommendations on how cooperatives can restructure to reduce labor costs. I don't know whether the panelists have an answer to that.
Yes, George, as we found that there's a clear difference between the cost structure of labor in estates and in cooperatives. The estates tend to use more of casual labor so that they only use that labor during processing time, and they're only left with skeleton staff for when there is no processing taking place. So I think there is some direction that cooperatives can take. However, there is a problem with the cooperatives because of separation costs. Some of the cooperatives are keenly aware that they need to reduce labor relative to the cherry they're intaking, as well as the need to get more of casual labor. But then, to lay off staff, it costs money. And with the little retention that they are getting, they are not able to do that. So they are keeping staff just because they cannot finance, the layoff costs. So unless the government comes up with some help on how they can help such cooperatives to disengage, it is going to remain a problem. So it's an issue that probably from policy perspective need to be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, Boniface. The next question, I think also in relation to that, are there any exciting new technologies in reducing processing costs identified during the study? This one was from Samuel to.
We looked at the 3 technologies and tried to compare their costs. As in one of the slides, you will see that the copalpas, generally, the cost was much lower than using the traditional disc pulpers. But there was a reminder that you must have the right other mix of factors so that you can benefit from the technology. So you need to have the proper labor structure, you have the necessary or rather the required cherry intake level. Otherwise, if you invest in that technology and then you are not having enough cherry to keep it going, then you also be having higher costs than even the traditional methods. So yes, there is new technologies, but you must have a proper mix of other factors for you to benefit from the technology. Thank you.
I think the other interesting part is, which was indicated earlier by one of the panelists, is the issue about the greenhouses. In drying, that needs to be looked further and probed further in terms of how it can reduce the cost of drying. We know the drying is actually where takes most of the time and most of the labor. So that greenhouse effect, that greenhouse impact, is one of the areas where we need to take into account, and if we can invest more on that. The other processing method which came about is, I think, is what they are calling the honey method, the honey processing method, where coffee is processed, and it is we encountered it in one of the estates where they are processing their coffee intact with the mucilage in, and then they pulp it, and they are saying there is a niche market which is for that particular kind of coffee. So that is also coming up as honey processing method, and we need to know more about it. It was only one, we encountered it on one particular estate, and it was a small scale. It was on a small scale, not on a large scale. So that to me was also interesting. So those are the areas which we need to maybe look into. George.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karanja. And given that we have only about 13 minutes left, and it was such a heavy presentation, I think we will only get one last question. But I want to inform, because I've also realized that people have started leaving. I think they've had their answers and so on. So when you exit, there'll be a question on, some of the topics that you would want answered in future meetings. So we will take the last question this morning, and we will end early, just so that, because I think there's been quite much to take in, from the wonderful work that Dr. Karanja and his colleagues have done here. So I think there was a question from Margaret Medamo, and she was asking, and again, this is to do with the issue of gender. On the issue of estate disclosure of information, did you find any difference amongst male and female estate owner respondents? Again, I think the key thing here is whether some of your results were disaggregated in gender. Dr. Karanja.
This one, Boniface, I think you had the opportunity to, we had the opportunity to interview both male and female, and like Boniface, can you comment?
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we were also very interested in looking at the dimension of gender. However, as you will appreciate, one of the challenges in getting data from the estates is that data is either not either there are no records, or that there is no willingness to share those records. So as Andrew had indicated earlier, what retro we had, we did not feel confident basically coming and showing it that this is how the gender disaggregated data looks like in terms of the processing. I think that it would take we had very little time, and within that time you could appreciate if we are looking at all these meals and within this wide area. That constrained the amount of data and the amount of time that we had available to delve into this further. This is one of the recommendations that we are making, that for sure, this is something that is important. And I think that at some point it might be necessary to support a study that will look at that in depth. I don't know whether that is exhaustive. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Boniface. I think that that's it. And the other challenge maybe panelists we faced with the estates, and which should have come out clearly, is that there is very little, both production and processing takes place in the same farm. And so it is very difficult to disaggregate what is happening in production and what is happening in processing. And most of the time they mix the two, and they are going simultaneously in the same time. So data also becomes a challenge. But in terms of gender, I think it's an important one. We encountered female-headed estates, and we looked at them, but they are not, the numbers were not big enough for us to be able to go in that direction of segregating the data in terms of gender. So I think when time allows, it might be interesting to look at female or the gender issue in estate sector, especially on the small estates. These are actually where you might get a bit of more interesting data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, team, and thank you very much, panelists. I think this session was much longer than the ones that we usually have on our monthly meetings. So our monthly meetings are usually 1.5 hours, but this one we had given 2 hours because we wanted a bit more interaction with the attendees to ask their questions to the panelists. I want to bring us back, of course, to why we were doing all this, why cost of processing. Again, it's in contribution to the ICO strategy on what is called Resolution 465. And for those of you that were in the ICO meeting in Nairobi last year, you might have been exposed to a bit of this. And the issue is really, we are working on the point of trying to increase and produce high-level and relevant independent research and data and contributing. And for those of you that have seen the ICO flagship report, it had some data from a previous study we had done last year on the economic viability of coffee farming. So again, we are taking that opportunity to try and feed in to this information, because at the end of the day, when people talk about prices, we need to really bring the context of what does it cost, what are the costs, and how can our farmers become even more profitable. And we are very grateful, to the German Corporation for funding this study and others that they've done, but also all other partners we've had as KCP, from the Rainforest Alliance, Solidaridad, HIVOS, who are in this group, Fair Trade, and all these other partners who've expanded this information, because at the end of the day, we want to ensure that we give proper information for farmers and other stakeholders to make the right decision and make coffee as profitable as it can be. Without further ado, I want to hand over back to the chair for some closing remarks, and look forward to sending the final report as soon as it's ready, but also sharing this webinar recording and the presentation to all of you who registered. Thank you.
Thank you, George, and the participants in this webinar. I would like to appreciate each one of you for taking time to join us in this study. You'll all agree, based on all the interactions that we had, this is a very important component, of course, of producing coffee. And we would request you to give your questions, which possibly may not have been answered here, to Sauti ya Kahawa or to the consultants. And as George has mentioned, we will be sending the recordings. And apart from that, those who may want even to get the records of our last webinar, we always have them in Sauti ya Kahawa. So it's important for all of us to visit that website. So I wish to thank all of you, the sponsors of the Kenya Coffee Platform, Solidaridad, AFCA, our Rainforest Alliance, and GCP. And of course, this is backed by the German government, and we really appreciate it. So I would not want to take more of your time, but just to wish you a very nice weekend ahead of you. And we hope to meet you when we'll have the next webinar.
Thank you very much. Enjoy a cup of Kenyan coffee. As you see, it takes a lot to process it. Thank you.
I'm enjoying one in Kira. Thank you.
And of course, in terms of reaching to the counties, our chairman is calling from the slopes of Mount Kenya as they talk to the Kirinyaga stakeholders.